Dr. Robert Church stares at his monitor in the dimly lit laboratory at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. It's a spring evening in 2014, and he's reviewing seafloor scans from the Gulf of Mexico. The data comes from 5,000 feet below the surface, where sunlight has never penetrated and pressure would crush a human body in seconds. There, in the grainy digital imagery, sits something that officially doesn't exist. A German U-boat, intact, lying exactly where a disgraced naval officer said it would be 72 years ago. Church leans back from his screen and runs his hand across his face. He's spent months analyzing wreck sites, but this one is different. This one rewrites history. The coordinates match perfectly with an after-action report filed on July 30th, 1942 by Lieutenant Herbert Claudius of PC-566, a report the Navy dismissed. A report that cost Claudius his credibility and nearly his career. The submarine's broken back tells the story. Stern section collapsed from internal explosion. Hull integrity compromised at multiple points. U-166 didn't escape that day in 1942. She died right there, 1,400 meters down, exactly where PC-566 dropped 8 depth charges. They called Claudius a liar. They said he wasted ordnance. They buried his report in a filing cabinet and moved on to more important matters. The official record stated that U-166 probably escaped, possibly sunk weeks later by aircraft in the Caribbean. But the ocean doesn't forget, and now, 7 decades after the fact, the truth emerges from the deep. PC-566 killed a U-boat. A small patrol craft crewed by merchant marines and insurance salesmen destroyed one of Germany's premier submarine hunters. This discovery does more than vindicate one man. It validates an entire navy that history forgot. The Donald Duck Navy, the Splinter fleet, the wooden boat crews that official historians dismissed as footnotes to the real war fought by real warships. They were supposed to be irrelevant, training vessels for raw recruits. Coastal patrol boats keeping harbor safe while the big boys fought the real battles in the Atlantic. But PC-566 wasn't just some coastal patrol boat. She was a steel-hulled submarine killer. And she had 342 identical sisters, plus 438 wooden submarine chasers, all built in small boatyards across America by men who'd never constructed warships before. Together, they formed the largest concentrated naval production program in history. More vessels, built faster, deployed more widely than any comparable program before or since. The question Dr. Church's discovery forces us to confront is simple, yet profound. How did the United States build a navy faster than Germany could sink it? The answer involves wood, small towns, and the most audacious industrial gamble of World War II, a gamble that bet American lives on vessels traditional naval officers considered floating coffins. A gamble that succeeded beyond anyone's wildest projections. This is the story of how America won the Battle of the Atlantic not with superior technology or brilliant tactics, but with something far more devastating, industrial capacity so overwhelming that Germany never stood a chance. The crisis didn't begin at Pearl Harbor. It began 3 days later in a conference room at the Navy's Bureau of Ships in Washington, D.C. Rear Admiral Samuel Robinson sat at the head of a long mahogany table, surrounded by senior staff officers and civilian naval architects. Outside, protesters demanded vengeance for Pearl Harbor. Inside, Robinson faced a mathematical problem that made the Japanese attack look manageable by comparison. Britain was starving. German U-boats were sinking 700,000 tons of Allied shipping every month. Tankers carrying heating oil from Venezuela, freighters loaded with wheat from Canada, cargo vessels transporting steel, ammunition, and aircraft from American factories, all going to the bottom of the Atlantic at a rate that exceeded Allied shipbuilding capacity. The numbers told a story of impending catastrophe. Britain imported 68 million tons of supplies annually before the war. By December 1941, imports had dropped to 31 million tons. Another year at current loss rates and Britain would face mass starvation. The war would end without a single German soldier setting foot on English soil. The solution seemed obvious: build more escort vessels. Destroyers to hunt submarines and protect convoys. But Robinson's staff had already done the math. It was impossible. Each convoy crossing the Atlantic needed at least 6 escort vessels for adequate protection. The Navy was running 30 convoys per month. That meant 180 escorts required just for Atlantic duty, add-in Caribbean patrols, coastal protection, training duties, and vessels under repair, and the actual requirement topped 500 escorts. The United States Navy possessed perhaps 50 destroyers available for Atlantic convoy duty in December 1941. Building more destroyers wouldn't solve the problem. A Fletcher-class destroyer required 18 months to construct and consumed 2,100 tons of scarce steel plate. The major shipyards were already committed to building carriers and battleships for the Pacific War. Even the Navy's economical solution, the destroyer escort, needed 14 months and 1,400 tons of steel. By the time enough destroyers launched to protect Atlantic convoys, Britain would have already surrendered. Commander James Arnold, a 37-year-old former yacht designer now wearing a Navy uniform, raised his hand tentatively. Robinson nodded. "What if we don't build destroyers?" Arnold said. The room went silent. Not build destroyers? That was like suggesting they fight a naval war without ships. Arnold continued quickly before anyone could dismiss him. What if we build patrol craft instead? Small vessels, simple designs. So basic that boat yards could build them, the kind of yards that make fishing trawlers and pleasure yachts. Captain Theodore Ruddock, a career destroyer officer, shook his head. Small craft can't survive Atlantic crossings. They're coastal vessels at best, then we use them for coastal work, Arnold replied. Free up the destroyers for ocean convoys. Every small craft protecting a coastal convoy means one more destroyer available for Atlantic duty. Robinson leaned forward. How small are we talking? 110 feet for the smallest vessels. Maybe 450 tons for the larger patrol craft. Armament? Depth charges, maybe a 3-inch gun for the larger boats. 40 millimeters and 20 millimeters anti-aircraft. How fast can we build them? Arnold pulled out a folder. He'd been working on this proposal for weeks, knowing this meeting was coming. A small patrol craft could be operational in 120 days from keel laying to commissioning. Maybe faster with proper coordination, Ruddock scoffed. And how many small boat yards are we talking about? 20, 30. That's not enough production to matter. Arnold opened his folder and pulled out a typed list. I've identified 63 boat yards capable of building small patrol craft. Most have never constructed military vessels, but they all build boats between 80 and 200 feet. Fishing boats, luxury yachts, coastal freighters, they have the skills. They just need the specifications. Robinson studied the list. Westward Boat Works in Bayou La Batre, Alabama. Quincy Adams Yacht Yard in Quincy, Massachusetts. Peterson Boat Works in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. He recognized some of the names, quality builders, but civilian operations. What about steel? Robinson asked. We're already short on plate steel for destroyer construction. Arnold took a breath. This was the radical part. What if we don't use steel for the smallest vessels? You mean aluminum, copper, I mean wood? The room exploded. Wooden warships in 1941? That was insane. Would belong to the age of sail, to Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar. Modern navies used steel, wood burned, wood rotted. Wood couldn't stand up to shellfire or depth-charge detonations. Robinson raised his hand for silence. Explain. Arnold had prepared for this objection. Not solid planking like old sailing ships, laminated construction. Multiple layers of lumber bonded with waterproof glue under pressure. Creates a hull stronger than single-thickness planking and nearly as strong as steel plate of equivalent weight. Nearly as strong isn't the same as actually strong, Ruddock said. No, Arnold admitted, but it's abundant. America's forests can supply unlimited lumber while steel production strains to meet demand. And it's fast. Any boatyard that builds fishing trawlers can laminate wooden hulls. Robinson considered this. Wooden warships, the idea was either brilliant or suicidal, and he couldn't tell which. What's the survivability, he asked. Unknown, Arnold said honestly, we've never built wooden vessels this size for combat operations. But the laminated construction should provide adequate strength and would actually have some advantages over steel. Shell fragments that would penetrate steel plate and create jagged shrapnel will punch clean through laminated wood. Cleaner wounds, less secondary damage, and wooden holes don't crack at the welds like steel construction. Reddick wasn't convinced. This sounds like desperation, so either we try something unconventional or we watch Britain starve and lose the war. Calculations. The PC for 6-1 class would be steel-hulled patrol craft, 173 feet long, displacing for 150 tons. Neither vessel was optimal. Neither could stand up to a destroyer in combat capability or seaworthiness. But they could be built in 120 days. They consumed minimal steel, and they could threaten submarines. Robinson signed the authorization orders on January 8, 1942. Within a week, specifications went out to 63 boatyards across the United States. The first hull took shape in a small boatyard in Bayou La Batre, Alabama, where palm trees swayed in the Gulf breeze. Westward Boat Works employed 47 men, mostly Cajun shipwrights, who'd spent their lives building fishing trawlers and shrimp boats for the Gulf fleet. The largest vessel they'd ever completed was 85 feet long. The specifications arrived in February 1942, a thick envelope containing blueprints, construction guidelines, and a letter from the Bureau of Ships emphasizing the urgent nature of the project. Master shipwright Claude Boudreau spread the plans across his drafting table and studied them carefully. The design was surprisingly simple. A round cottoned hull shape, traditional for wooden construction, with 7 frames spaced 15 feet apart. Laminated planking using 3 layers of 2-inch mahogany, bonded with waterproof resorcinol glue and fastened with bronze screws. For watertight compartments. Engine room amidships, crew quarters forward. Depth charge racks aft. Boudreau had built hundreds of boats, but never anything like this. A warship made of wood designed to hunt submarines. He called his crew together on a Monday morning in late February. "Boys," he said in his thick Louisiana accent, "we're building something the Navy says can't be built. So let's prove 'em wrong." The keel went down on March 2, 1942, 7 white oak timbers, scarfed and bolted together, stretching 110 feet across the boat shed. The frames followed, steam bent and shaped, creating the skeleton that would define the hull's form. Then came the planking. This was where traditional boat building met modern engineering. Instead of single-layer planking, the Navy's specifications called for 3 separate layers, each oriented at different angles to distribute stress. The inner layer ran diagonally from keel to sheer at a 45-degree angle. The middle layer ran diagonally in the opposite direction. The outer layer ran fore and aft parallel to the keel. Each layer was 2 inches thick. Between each layer, workers spread waterproof glue and clamped the planks under pressure until the adhesive cured. The result was a hull 6 inches thick, stronger than solid wood and nearly as strong as steel plate. Traditional wooden shipbuilding was a slow, careful craft. Planks were fitted individually, shaped to perfection, allowed to swell in the water until the hull became tight. The Navy didn't have time for traditional methods. A 4th team installed through hull fittings and support structures. While Westward worked on the hull in Alabama, other yards tackled different components. Small suppliers across the country manufactured specialized fittings, bronze propeller shafts, rudder assemblies, steering gear, anchor windlasses. The Navy provided the complex components that small boatyards couldn't produce. Weapons came from Navy ordnance depots, 140mm Bofors gun, 3 20mm Oerlikon cannons, 8 depth charges with roll-off racks. A simple radio set. On June 18, 1942, less than 4 months after the keel went down, SC-497 launched at Bayou La Batre. The Navy sent a commissioning crew 2 weeks later. 27 men, mostly Naval Reserve officers and enlisted personnel pulled from Merchant Marine service. Their commander was Lieutenant Howard Sanders, a 31-year-old insurance salesman from Pittsburgh who spent exactly 6 weeks at the Navy's Small Craft Training Center in Miami learning how to operate a vessel he'd never seen before. SC-2 497 commissioned on July 6, 1942. None of them did. The crew included two former commercial fishermen who at least understood boats, 3 mechanics who understood engines. They had 1 week to learn their vessel before deploying on anti-submarine patrol off Cape Hatteras, where German U-boats were sinking 3 ships per day. Sanders gathered his crew on the fantail for their first briefing. "The Navy doesn't think we can do this. I'm not sure we can do this. But we're going to do it anyway. Each boat carries 14 torpedoes and has sunk dozens of merchant ships. Our job is to make them afraid to surface. We probably can't sink them. We don't have sonar. We can't track them underwater, but we can make them dive." A young seaman raised his hand. "They probably won't," Sanders said. "A U-boat carries limited torpedoes, and if they don't ignore us." C-497 deployed on July 14, 1942. She joined a small fleet of wooden submarine chasers patrolling the Atlantic coast, vessels that looked more like pleasure yachts than warships. The Germans called them the Donald Duck Navy, a contemptuous name for boats they considered too small to matter. The first engagement came on a moonless night off Cape Hatteras. Lieutenant Sanders had taken SC-497 into Norfolk for minor repairs, so he missed what happened next. But the entire Splinter fleet heard about it within hours. It was 3:15 in the morning. Most of SC-209's crew was below decks, sleeping or off watch. Seaman First Class Robert Murphy was the starboard lookout. He spotted the silhouette at 2,000 yards. The officer of the deck, Lieutenant Howard Sanders, no relation to SC-497's commander, grabbed his binoculars. The silhouette was clear against the false dawn. A submarine surfaced, running on diesels to charge batteries. U-202, a Type IXC U-boat under the command of Captain Lieutenant Hans-Heinz Linder, had been hunting convoys along the American coast for 3 weeks. She'd sunk 7 merchant ships and was running low on torpedoes. Linder had surfaced to recharge batteries and planned to head back to France within 48 hours. He never saw SC-209 approaching. Sanders hit the general alarm. "Battle stations, all hands to battle stations." The crew scrambled from their bunks, pulling on clothes as they ran. The 40mm gun crew reached their positions within 90 seconds, but by then the submarine had crash-dived. SC-209 charged forward at 18 knots, her diesels roaring. The round cotton hull pounded through the gentle swells, spray flying across the bow. Sanders estimated the submarine's dive location and plotted an intercept course. Without sonar, he was guessing. But commercial fishermen are good at guessing where things are underwater, slow to 10 knots. Sanders ordered as they approached the swirl where the submarine had disappeared. "Prepare depth charges in the stern." 2 sailors stood by the depth charge racks. 8 charges, Mark 6 pattern, each containing 600 pounds of TNT. The charges were set for 2 different depths, for at 50 feet, for at 100 feet. The idea was to bracket the submarine's likely depth. -1 to 209 passed over the estimated position. Roll charges for depth charges tumbled off the stern racks and splashed into the dark water. Seconds ticked by as they sank, then the ocean erupted. For massive detonations lifted SC-209's stern clear of the water. The wooden hull flexed and buckled but didn't break. Water geysered 50 feet into the air. The shockwave traveled through the submarine chaser as hull with a bone-rattling shudder that knocked men off their feet. Sanders circled and made a second run. For more charges rolled off the stern. For more detonations shook the night. Then silence, no debris surfaced, no oil slick appeared. Sanders circled the area for an hour, watching for any sign that they'd hit the submarine, but the ocean gave up nothing. Secure from battle stations, Sanders finally ordered. "Resume patrol pattern." SC-209 returned to Norfolk 2 days later. Sanders filed his after-action report claiming a probable submarine contact and attack. The Navy credited him with probable damage, but noted that without physical evidence, the kill couldn't be confirmed. German records would later show that U-200 to survive the attack with minor damage and continued operations for another month before being sunk by British aircraft off France. -1 to 209's depth charges had come close enough to rattle the submarine and force Linder to dive deeper than planned, but not close enough to destroy her. But the engagement proved something crucial. Wooden boats could attack submarines and survive their own depth charges. The laminated hull construction absorbed the shock waves better than expected. The flexible wooden planking compressed and rebounded rather than cracking at the welds like steel construction. Damage was minimal, some split seams in the stern deck, a few sprung planks that required caulking, but nothing that couldn't be repaired in 24 hours. Word spread through the Splinter fleet. SC-209 had engaged a U-boat. She'd dropped 8 depth charges. She'd survived. Maybe they could actually do this. Over the next 6 weeks, similar engagements occurred up and down the Atlantic coast. SC-215 attacked a periscope sighting off Jacksonville. SC-227 depth charged a suspected contact off Chesapeake Bay. SC-263 engaged a surface submarine off Hatteras. None achieved confirmed kills, but that wasn't the point. Every engagement forced U-boats to remain submerged longer. Every attack burned German battery power and limited their operational radius. Every time a submarine commander spotted one of those wooden patrol boats, he had to make a calculation, surface and risk attack, or stay submerged and accept reduced speed and visibility. The Splinter fleet wasn't winning through superior combat power. They were winning through sheer numbers and persistence. By September 1942, 84 SC-class submarine chasers were operational. German U-boat commanders reported encounters with small patrol craft in their war diaries with increasing frequency. The boats were everywhere, not individually dangerous, but collectively unavoidable. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat force, reviewed the intelligence reports with growing concern. American anti-submarine forces were multiplying faster than his boats could sink them. For every U-boat Germany launched, America commissioned 10 patrol craft. The mathematics of industrial war were turning against Germany, and there was nothing Dönitz could do to stop it. While the wooden SC-class boats patrolled coastal waters, their larger steel cousins were tackling more demanding missions. PC-566 commissioned in April 1942 at a medium-sized shipyard in New York. At 173 feet and 450 tons, she was substantially larger than the wooden submarine chasers. Steel construction meant she was heavier, slower to build, and consumed precious steel plate that could have gone to destroyer production. But steel construction also meant she could mount sonar. The sonar equipment installed on PC-566 was primitive by destroyer standards. Effective range topped out at 1,500 yards. Detection accuracy depended heavily on water conditions, temperature layers, and the operator's skill. False contacts were common. Whales, schools of fish, underwater terrain features all could produce sonar returns that looked like submarines. But sonar beat visual detection. With sonar, a patrol craft could track submarines underwater, maintain contact during evasive maneuvers, and guide depth charge attacks with at least some precision. PC-566's commander was Lieutenant Herbert Claudius, a 34-year-old merchant marine captain from Baltimore. Before the war, he'd commanded cargo ships running between Gulf ports and South America. He knew the waters, he knew ship handling, he'd never hunted a submarine in his life. The Navy sent Claudius and his crew to the Small Craft Training Center in Miami for 6 weeks of intensive training. They learned sonar operation, depth charge tactics, convoy escort procedures, and damage control. Then they deployed to the Gulf of Mexico to protect oil tankers and freighters transiting between Texas ports and the Atlantic. The Gulf seemed like a backwater assignment. The main submarine action was off the Atlantic coast and in the Caribbean. The Gulf was relatively quiet, a few U-boat sightings, but no concentrated activity. That changed in July 1942. German intelligence had identified the Gulf shipping lanes as a critical vulnerability. Oil tankers departing from Houston, Beaumont, and New Orleans carry heating oil and aviation fuel to the East Coast. Sinking enough tankers and the entire Allied supply chain would seize up. U-166, a Type IXE U-boat under the command of Oberleutnant Hans-Gunther Kuhlmann, entered the Gulf in mid-July. Her orders were simple: sink tankers, create havoc, force the Americans to divert escorts from the Atlantic. Kuhlmann was a capable commander with 2 previous patrols under his belt. He'd sunk for merchant ships in the Caribbean and understood American convoy procedures. He knew the escorts were thinly spread. He knew the small patrol craft lacked sophisticated detection equipment. He planned to operate brazenly, surfacing in daylight if necessary, taking his time to line up perfect torpedo shots. On July 30, 1942, at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, PC-566 was escorting the passenger freighter SS Robert E. Lee southbound from New Orleans. The Robert E. Lee was an aging coastal passenger ship pressed into wartime service, carrying 268 passengers and crew, women, children, British civilians evacuating Jamaica for safety in the United States. Lieutenant Claudius was on the bridge when his lookout spotted the periscope wake. Contact, starboard beam. 800 yards, looks like a periscope. Claudius grabbed his binoculars. There, a thin wake cutting through the calm Gulf waters. Straight as a knife blade, moving at periscope speed toward the Robert E. Lee. He had seconds to make a decision. The textbook response was to place PC-566 between the submarine and the target, force the U-boat to dive, and then coordinate with other escorts for a methodical attack. But there were no other escorts. PC-566 was alone. And the submarine was 800 yards from a ship carrying 268 civilians. Claudius made a split-second call that would define his career and haunt him for the rest of his life. All ahead flank, turn to intercept, battle stations. PC-566 surged forward, her diesels howling. The patrol craft turned hard to starboard, cutting inside the submarine's approach angle. Claudius was gambling everything on one assumption, that he could reach the submarine's position before it fired. In U-166's conning tower, Hans-Gunther Kuhlmann watched through his periscope as the small patrol craft charged toward him. He had a perfect firing solution on the Robert E. Lee. Range 600 meters, speed 12 knots. Angle on the bow 60 degrees. But the patrol craft was closing fast, too fast. If he stayed at periscope depth, the American boat would be on top of him in 30 seconds. Kuhlmann made his choice. Fire now, dive immediately, fire 2-1. The torpedo launched with a hiss of compressed air. Kuhlmann didn't wait to observe the result. Dive, dive, take her down to 80 meters. Emergency dive. U-166's ballast tanks flooded. The submarine's bow pitched down steeply. Kuhlmann watched the patrol craft through his periscope for another few seconds. Steel hull, armed with depth charges, closing at high speed. Then the periscope dipped below the surface and he was blind. On PC-566's bridge, Claudius saw the periscope disappear. He had no sonar contact yet. His sonar operator was still training the transducer, trying to pick up the submarine's acoustic signature. Visual tracking was all he had. Estimate submarine position, Claudius shouted to his navigation officer. Based on last observed bearing and course, estimate position 500 yards ahead, diving to unknown depth. PC-566 raced across the Gulf at 18 knots. The estimated intercept point rushed toward them. Claudius watched the range close, 600 yards, 500 yards, 400 yards. Behind them, aboard the Robert E. Lee, passengers crowded the railings watching the patrol craft's attack run. They didn't know a torpedo was racing toward them at 30 knots. Sonar contact, the sonar operator suddenly shouted. Bearing 185, range 300 yards. Moving away from us, depth approximately 50 meters. Prepare depth charges, set pattern for 50 and 100 feet. The depth charge crew scrambled, 8 charges ready on the stern racks. The settings were already close, they just needed fine adjustment. The chief petty officer in charge of the depth charges personally verified each setting. You didn't get second chances with these attacks. Depth charges ready. PC 566 passed over the sonar contact's estimated position. Roll charges. 8 depth charges tumbled off the stern racks in a rectangular pattern. For set for 50 feet, for set for 100 feet. They splashed into the Gulf and sank rapidly. Claudius counted silently. Depth charges sank at approximately 10 feet per second. A 50-foot setting meant 5 seconds to detonation. He reached 5 seconds, nothing, 6 seconds, 7 seconds, then the Gulf exploded. 8 massive detonations erupted in rapid succession. The shockwaves traveled through the water at 5,000 feet per second, faster than sound in air. PC 566's stern lifted completely out of the water. The steel hull rang like a bell. Men were thrown to the deck. Equipment tore loose from its mountings. The patrol craft crashed back into the Gulf with a tremendous splash. Water cascaded across the deck. The engines roared as the propellers bit air, then screamed as they re-engaged with water. Claudius pulled himself to his feet and looked astern. A massive oil slick was spreading across the surface. Not a small leak, hundreds of gallons. Thick black crude oil mixed with diesel fuel, spreading in an expanding circle that covered several hundred square yards. Debris was surfacing, wooden planking, cork insulation. Life jackets marked with German text, a sailor's cap, a leather glove. "We got him," Claudius breathed. "We killed him." His crew erupted in cheers. Men were hugging each other, laughing, shouting they'd done it. A small patrol craft with minimal training had killed a German U-boat, but the celebration died seconds later. Behind them, 700 yards away, Robert E. Lee's side erupted in a towering explosion. The torpedo had found its target. The freighter's midship section disintegrated. Smoke and flame shot 100 feet into the air. The ship immediately took a list to starboard as water poured through the massive hole in her hull. Claudius felt his stomach drop. He'd attacked the submarine. He'd killed it. But he'd been 3 seconds too late. The torpedo had already been in the water. "Come about," Claudius ordered, his voice shaking. "All ahead full, prepare for rescue operations." PC 566 raced toward the stricken freighter. Robert E. Lee was sinking fast. The list increased rapidly as flooding overwhelmed the bulkheads. Passengers and crew were abandoning ship, jumping into the Gulf, inflating life jackets, launching lifeboats. The ship took 15 minutes to sink. 15 terrible minutes as Claudius and his crew watched a vessel they were supposed to protect slide beneath the surface. PC 566 spent the next 4 hours rescuing survivors. They pulled 168 people from the water: women, children, merchant seamen, Navy gun crew. 25 people died. Some in the initial explosion, some from drowning, some from injuries sustained when the torpedo detonated. When PC 566 finally returned to New Orleans, Claudius filed his after-action report. He described the periscope sighting, the attack run, the depth charge pattern, and the oil slick and debris that surfaced. He included statements from crew members who saw the submarine's wake and observed the debris field. He claimed U-166 destroyed with high confidence. The Navy's assessment was swift and brutal. The Board of Inquiry concluded that while PC 566 probably damaged a submarine, there was insufficient evidence for a confirmed kill. Oil and debris could have come from damaged fuel tanks blown free by near-miss explosions. U-boats routinely released oil and debris to convince attackers they'd been sunk, in known German tactic. More damaging, the board suggested that Claudius's premature attack might have triggered the torpedo launch that killed 25 people. Had he waited, coordinated with other units, approached more carefully, perhaps the submarine would have been forced to abort the attack without firing. The criticism was devastating. Instead of receiving a commendation for killing a U-boat, Claudius received a reprimand for tactical errors that resulted in civilian casualties. The official record stated that U-166 probably escaped with damage and was possibly sunk weeks later by aircraft in the Caribbean. Location unknown. Herbert Claudius never received credit for the kill. He continued to command PC-566 through 1943, but the incident haunted him. When the war ended, he returned to the Merchant Marine Service and never spoke publicly about that day. In July 1942, he died in 1995, still believing he'd killed U-166, still bitter that the Navy never acknowledged what he and his crew had accomplished. The truth remained buried 1,400 meters below the Gulf of Mexico, waiting for technology advanced enough to find it. By early 1943, the Splinter fleet had crystallized into a two-tier system that reflected the capabilities and limitations of each vessel class. The wooden SC-class submarine chasers concentrated on coastal anti-submarine patrol, harbor defense, and convoy escort in relatively calm waters. Operating within 50 miles of shore, they provided the first line of defense against U-boats attacking coastal shipping. Their shallow draft allowed them to operate in waters too shallow for submarines to dive effectively, forcing U-boats to either surface and engage a risky proposition or move to deeper water where larger escorts waited. The Steel PC-class patrol craft took more demanding roles: Atlantic convoy escort, Caribbean patrol, and Mediterranean operations. Their sonar equipment, heavier armament, and better seaworthiness made them suitable for open ocean work, though they were still limited compared to destroyer escorts and destroyers. The deployment pattern created a layered defense. Close to shore, wooden SC-class boats formed a visual patrol line. Further offshore, PC-class boats with sonar provided detection capability. Beyond that, destroyer escorts and destroyers formed the main convoy screen. German U-boat commanders had to penetrate all three layers to reach high-value targets in convoy. Each layer forced tactical decisions that reduced overall effectiveness. But the Splinter fleet's greatest contribution to the war effort had nothing to do with sinking submarines. In October 1943, Allied planners began serious preparation for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. They faced a critical problem that threatened the entire operation: German magnetic mines. Since 1940, German aircraft had been sowing magnetic mines throughout the English Channel. The mines lay on the seafloor, dormant, until a large steel hull passed overhead. The ship's magnetic field triggered the mine's detonator, and 300 kilograms of explosives detonated directly beneath the vessel's keel, the most vulnerable location. Destroyers, destroyer escorts, and landing craft were all steel-hulled. All generated magnetic fields sufficient to trigger the mines. Minesweepers using magnetic influence gear could clear mines, but the process was slow, dangerous, and never complete. A single overlooked mine could sink a destroyer or landing craft loaded with troops. Commander James Arnold, the yacht designer who'd originally proposed the small boat program, was now serving on the invasion planning staff. He was reviewing vessel assignments when he realized something interesting. The wooden SC-497 submarine chasers generated almost no magnetic signature. Arnold ran calculations. A Fletcher-class destroyer displaced 2,500 tons of steel and generated a magnetic field intensity of approximately 180 milligauss at 20 meters distance. A Steel PC-461 patrol craft displaced 450 tons of steel and generated roughly 70 milligauss. Both signatures were sufficient to trigger German magnetic mines at typical sensitivity settings. An SC-497 submarine chaser displaced 148 tons total, but only 12 tons of that mass was ferrous metal: the diesel engines, propeller shafts, gun mounts, and fittings. The hull itself was wood, the superstructure was wood. Even most of the internal framing was wood. The magnetic signature measured approximately 8 milligauss at 20 meters. German magnetic mines required at least 40 milligauss to trigger reliably. The wooden submarine chasers could sail through minefields that would destroy steel vessels. Arnold proposed using SC-class vessels as inshore patrol and traffic control craft during the Normandy invasion. The small boats would guide landing craft from the transport area to the beaches, operating in shallow coastal waters where magnetic mines were most heavily concentrated. Their wooden hulls would allow them to work in minefields too dangerous for steel escorts. The proposal met resistance, as Sea-class vessels were notoriously uncomfortable. They rolled violently in anything above calm seas. The round-bottomed hull design necessary for wooden construction provided minimal stability. Sailors called them vomit comets and rolling tubs. Operating these vessels in the English Channel in June, with its cold water and unpredictable weather, seemed cruel to the crews. But the alternative was worse. Without close-in escorts immune to magnetic mines, landing craft would navigate through minefields blind. Casualties would be catastrophic. The Navy approved Arnold's plan in January 1944. 64 Sea-class submarine chasers deployed to England between February and May 1944. Their crews underwent intensive training in navigation, traffic control, and coastal operations under fire. They learned to guide landing craft through marked channels using signal lights, radio beacons, and visual signals. They practiced operating close to shore under simulated artillery fire. They ran repeated drills on survivor rescue, damage control, and emergency medical procedures. The wooden boats that had been dismissed as inadequate for serious combat were about to play a crucial role in the largest amphibious invasion in history. D-Day began for the Splinter fleet at 3 a.m. on June 6, 1944, SC-503, SC-508, and SC-51 to position themselves 1,000 yards offshore from Omaha Beach, marking the lane entrance with signal lights and radio beacons. As the first wave of landing craft emerged from the transport area 5 miles offshore, the SC boats directed them into the correct approach channels. The wooden submarine chasers were sitting ducks. German artillery on the bluffs had clear lines of sight to the beach approaches. 88mm guns, 105mm howitzers, and heavy machine guns covered every approach lane. The German defenders had spent months preparing for this invasion, zeroing their weapons on specific coordinates, pre-plotting firing solutions for every likely landing site. As dawn broke and visibility improved, the German guns opened fire. -1 to 503 took the first hit. An 88mm shell detonated 20 yards off the port beam, sending shrapnel slicing through the wooden superstructure. 2 sailors died instantly, 5 more went down with severe wounds. The blast shredded the radio antenna and knocked out main electrical power. The crew fought to keep the ship operational. Damage control parties shored up hull breaches with wooden patches and emergency caulking. The engineering officer switched to auxiliary power. The communications officer rigged a backup antenna using a whip antenna meant for emergency use only. SC-503 stayed on station. SC-512 suffered engine damage from shell fragments that penetrated the engine room through the thin wooden hull. 1 diesel engine went down immediately, reducing speed to 10 knots. The chief engineer and his team worked frantically to keep the remaining engine running while simultaneously fighting a small fire in the fuel system. SC-512 stayed on station throughout D-Day and for weeks afterward. The wooden submarine chasers served as the invasion beach's traffic control system. They guided landing craft through cleared channels, recovered survivors from vessels hit by mines or artillery, and provided what little anti-aircraft fired their 40mm and 20mm guns could manage. The wooden hulls absorbed punishment better than expected. The laminated construction dispersed impact force across multiple layers rather than concentrating stress as steel plating did. Shell fragments that would have created deadly secondary explosions in steel-hulled vessels punched through the wood and exited on the opposite side, creating clean holes that could be plugged relatively easily. Across the entire Normandy operation, Sea-class vessels guided 47,000 landing craft to shore. They rescued more than 2,300 soldiers and sailors from damaged vessels. They operated continuously in minefields that sank or damaged dozens of steel-hulled craft. Not one S-class vessel was sunk by magnetic mines. German records later revealed that Allied forces landed directly over minefields containing more than 6,700 magnetic mines between Omaha Beach and Utah Beach. The mines were active and properly set. They should have sunk dozens of vessels, but the wooden boats sailed through them without incident. The hulls that traditional naval officers had dismissed as obsolete proved immune to Germany's most effective defensive weapon. In the end, technology defeated technology through the simple expedient of reverting to ancient materials. Wood beat steel, the 18th century beat the 20th century. Sometimes the old ways work best. While wooden submarine chasers made history at Normandy, back in American waters, another piece of the Splinter fleet story was still being written. Lieutenant Eugene McDaniel commanded PC-565, a steel patrol craft operating off Cape Lookout, North Carolina. He'd been a merchant ship captain before the war, running cargo between East Coast ports. The Navy commissioned him a lieutenant and sent him to the Small Craft Training Center for 6 weeks of training. Now he commanded a 450-ton patrol craft with a crew of 63 reservists, hunting German submarines in the same waters where Blackbeard had prowled to centuries earlier. On October 5, 1942, PC-565 was escorting a coastal convoy of 6 merchant ships. The convoy was bound from Norfolk to Charleston, hugging the coast to stay under the protective umbrella of land-based aircraft. At 2:55 p.m., PC-565's sonar operator picked up a contact at 1,800 yards. Sonar contact, bearing 270, range 1,800 yards, moving left to right across our course. McDaniel moved to the sonar station and listened to the ping return. It was strong, solid, not a whale or school of fish. The acoustic signature had the distinctive metallic ring of a steel hull. Classification: probable submarine, sir. Speed approximately 8 knots, depth estimated 150 feet. McDaniel made his decision instantly. Battle stations, all ahead flank. Come to course to 70. PC-565 increased speed to 18 knots and turned toward the contact. This was what they'd trained for. This was why the Navy had built these boats. The submarine, later identified as U-521, a Type IXC boat under the command of Captain Lieutenant Klaus Barkston, was stalking the convoy. Barkston had been observing the merchant ships for hours, waiting for optimal firing position. The small patrol craft hadn't concerned him. Patrol craft were nuisances, not threats. But this patrol craft had sonar, and sonar changed everything. In U-521's control room, the hydrophone operator suddenly called out, "High-speed screws bearing 090. Range closing rapidly. Barkston looked through his periscope. The patrol craft was turning toward them, accelerating. That meant they'd been detected. Dive deeper. Take her to 200 meters, rig for depth charge. U-521's diving planes angled down steeply. The submarine descended rapidly, trying to get beneath the thermocline layer where sonar detection became difficult. But PC-565's sonar operator held contact. The water conditions were good. No temperature layers, no thermal gradients. The submarine's acoustic signature remained clear. Contact bearing 265, range 1,200 yards. Target depth now 180 feet. McDaniel plotted the intercept course mentally. The submarine was diving and turning left, trying to evade. Standard German tactics, but the turn was predictable. He could anticipate the submarine's track. Come left to 255, increase speed to maximum. PC-565 carved through the coastal waters. The distance closed rapidly, 1,000 yards, 800 yards, 600 yards. Prepare depth charges, set pattern for 150 and 200 feet. The depth charge crew sprang into action. They adjusted the hydrostatic triggers on 8 charges, setting for 150 feet and for 200 feet. The idea was to bracket the submarine's depth hit above and below simultaneously to maximize damage probability. Range 700 yards, McDaniel watched the range close. You wanted to drop depth charges when you passed over the submarine's position, not when you were still approaching. Drop too early and the submarine could turn away. Drop too late and you'd miss astern. Range 500 yards, contact bearing constant. We're on intercept course, McDaniel waited. Sonar range wasn't perfect. There was always uncertainty, but you had to commit at some point. You had to trust your equipment and your training. Range 300 yards, roll charges. 8 depth charges tumbled off PC-565's stern racks. They hit the water in a rectangular pattern, for on each side of the patrol craft's wake. The charges sank rapidly through the clear Atlantic water. In U-521, the hydrophone operator heard the splashes. Was her bombing? He shouted, "Water bombs, depth charges." Barkston ordered emergency maneuvers. Hard right rudder, all ahead flank, dive deeper. But there wasn't time. The first depth charge detonated at 150 feet, directly above U-521's pressure hull. The shockwave traveled through water at supersonic speed, compressing the submarine's hull with 30,000 pounds of force. Metal groaned, rivets popped, light bulbs shattered. Then the second charge detonated, and the third, and the fourth. 8 massive explosions bracketed U-521 in a killing box of overlapping pressure waves. The submarine's pressure hull flexed beyond its design limits. Seams cracked, ballast tank seals failed. The starboard diving plane tore loose from its mounting. Water began flooding into the control room. "Emergency surface," Barkston shouted. "Blow all ballast tanks." Compressed air roared into the ballast tanks, forcing water out. U-521's bow angled up sharply. The submarine rose toward the surface, trailing oil and debris. On PC-565's bridge, McDaniel watched the oil slick spreading across the surface, massive, hundreds of gallons. That wasn't a near miss, that was serious damage. "Sonar contact is surfacing," the sonar operator reported. Range 400 yards. Bearing 270, all guns prepare to engage. U-521 broke the surface bow first at a steep angle, water streaming from her conning tower. The submarine was critically damaged. Both diesel engines were flooded, electrical power was failing. The stern compartments were flooding rapidly. Barkston opened the conning tower hatch and looked out. The patrol craft was turning toward him, guns already training. He had no options left. "Abandon ship," Barkston ordered. All hands abandoned ship. But before the crew could reach the escape hatches, PC-565's 3-inch gun opened fire. The first shell hit the conning tower at 400 yards, punching through the steel and detonating inside. The second shell hit the pressure hull forward of the conning tower. The third shell struck the afterdeck. The 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikon cannons joined the barrage. Shells ripped through the submarine's superstructure and perforated the pressure hull in dozens of places. U-521 slipped beneath the surface bow first, water pouring through the open conning tower hatch and the shell holes in her hull. She disappeared in seconds, leaving only a spreading oil slick and floating debris. 49 German sailors went down with her. There were no survivors. PC-565 circled the area for 2 hours, documenting the debris field, oil, wood fragments, life jackets, a navigation chart, personal belongings. Everything floated to the surface in a grim confirmation that the submarine had been destroyed. McDaniel filed his after-action report claiming U-521 destroyed with high confidence. Unlike Herbert Claudius's report 2 months earlier, McDaniel's claim was accepted immediately. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The debris field was extensive. Most importantly, U-521 never reported back to German naval headquarters. The kill was confirmed. PC-565 had done what the Navy said these small patrol craft could do. An SC-497 wooden submarine chaser cost $180,000 to build and carried a crew of 27 men. A PC-461 steel patrol craft cost $620,000 and carried 65 men. A Fletcher-class destroyer cost $6 million and carried 300 crew. Losing 5 submarine chasers cost less in dollars and manpower than losing 1 destroyer. The mathematics favored building numerous cheap vessels that crews could survive losing rather than few expensive vessels that took irreplaceable crews to the bottom when they sank. This design philosophy produced measurable results in casualty statistics. During World War II, 28 SC-class vessels were lost to all causes, 8 to enemy action, 6 to weather, 14 to accidents and collisions. Total casualties across all SC operations, 193 killed and 347 wounded. PC-class losses were similarly modest, 11 vessels lost to all causes, with 280 for killed and 401 wounded. Combined casualty total, 477 killed and 748 wounded from more than 40,000 men who served aboard these vessels during the war. Casualty rate, 3.1%. Now compare that to German U-boat service. Germany commissioned 1,162 U-boats during the war. 785 were lost in combat. Of 40,900 men who served in the U-boat force, 28,000 died. Casualty rate, 68.4%. 3% of Splinter fleet crews died. 68% of U-boat crews died. The philosophical difference between American and German warship design produced mathematical consequences. American designers built vessels that prioritized crew survival even when it compromised combat capability. German designers built vessels that prioritized combat capability even when it killed their crews. In a long war of attrition, the American approach proved superior. You can replace ships faster than you can replace trained crews. Building vessels that bring their crews home meant those crews could fight again on new vessels. Building vessels that killed their crews meant constant training demands that strained German resources. The Splinter fleet embodied industrial warfare at its most effective. Not sophisticated weapons deployed in small numbers, but adequate weapons deployed in overwhelming numbers. Not highly trained specialists operating complex systems, but minimally trained reservists operating simple systems. Not technological superiority, but industrial capacity so massive that the enemy simply could kill vessels faster than America could build them. Admiral Karl Dönitz recognized this reality by late 1943. In his memoirs, he wrote, "The American small craft program proved decisive in turning the Battle of the Atlantic against us. We could not sink their escorts faster than they could build them." Every U-boat patrol encountered more American vessels than the previous patrol. By 1944, our submarines spent more time evading escorts than attacking convoys. The mathematics of industrial war had turned decisively against Germany. The true value of the Splinter fleet extended far beyond direct combat engagements. Of the 438 SC-class vessels commissioned, only 17 engaged submarines in combat where post-action confirmation was possible. 3 achieved probable kills. None achieved confirmed kills independently, though SC vessels participated in several multi-ship attacks that resulted in confirmed kills. The 343 PC-class vessels achieved better combat results due to their sonar equipment. 7 vessels achieved confirmed submarine kills, 14 more achieved probable kills. PC-565, PC-566, and PC-619 were officially credited with sinking U-boats. But these direct combat statistics miss the larger strategic picture. The Splinter fleet's primary contribution was forcing U-boat commanders to operate inefficiently. Consider the tactical mathematics from a U-boat commander's perspective. A Type 7 U-boat carried 14 torpedoes and could remain on patrol for approximately 40 days. Each torpedo cost 24,000 Reichsmarks and represented Germany's primary ship-killing weapon. Firing a torpedo at a 450-ton patrol craft meant 1 fewer torpedo available for a 10,000-ton freighter carrying aviation fuel or tanks or ammunition. The target value calculation was straightforward: ignore the patrol craft, sink the valuable cargo. But ignoring the patrol craft meant accepting attack risk. Every time a U-boat commander spotted an SC or PC vessel, he had to make a choice: surface and engage, burning precious deck gun ammunition and risking depth charge attack, or remain submerged, accepting reduced speed and visibility. Most commanders chose to remain submerged. Operating submerged reduced speed from 17 knots surfaced to 7 knots submerged. It consumed battery power that required surfacing to recharge. It limited visibility to periscope observations instead of lookout observations from the conning tower. It forced the submarine to operate reactively instead of proactively. More time submerged meant fewer attack opportunities. Fewer attacks meant lower tonnage sunk per patrol. Lower tonnage meant less strategic impact. The Splinter fleet's indirect contribution, forcing submarines to operate less efficiently, exceeded the direct contribution of actual combat engagements by an order of magnitude. Intelligence analysis after the war confirmed this assessment. German patrol reports from 1943 to 1940 showed a dramatic increase in submerged operating time corresponding directly to increased American patrol craft presence. U-boat commanders reported spending 60 to 70% of patrol time submerged in 1943-1944, compared to 30 to 40% in 1941-1942. That shift in operating pattern reduced average tonnage sunk per U-boat patrol from 22,000 tons in early 1940 to 2,000 tons by late 1943. The decline was primarily due to improved Allied anti-submarine weapons or better convoy tactics. It was due to sheer numbers of escorts forcing submarines to operate cautiously. The Splinter fleet also freed larger warships for more demanding missions. Every SC-class vessel patrolling coastal waters meant one destroyer available for Atlantic convoy duty. Every PC-class vessel escorting Caribbean tankers meant one destroyer escort available for hunter-killer operations. By mid-1943, the 521 patrol craft then operational had freed up approximately 87 destroyers and destroyer escorts for fleet operations. Those 87 warships participated in crucial battles like the North Atlantic convoy battles of spring 1943 that broke the back of the U-boat offensive. The mathematical cascade effect was profound. Building 521 small patrol craft costing $285 million total enabled the deployment of 87 larger warships costing $522 million total to missions where they achieved strategic impact impossible for small craft. Industrial warfare isn't about individual weapon effectiveness. It's about system efficiency across entire production and deployment chains. Living conditions aboard the Splinter fleet vessels ranged from uncomfortable to barely tolerable. The SC-class wooden submarine chasers were particularly notorious. The round-bottomed hull design necessary for laminated, wooden construction provided minimal stability in any sea state above calm. The vessels rolled dramatically. 45-degree rolls were common in moderate seas, and 60-degree rolls occurred in storms. Seaman First Class Robert Morrison served aboard SC-6 for 8 in the Atlantic. In his 1987 memoir, he described the experience vividly. "We rolled so badly that standing watch required holding on with both hands. Eating was impossible in any kind of sea. Food slid off plates before you could secure it. Sleeping meant wedging yourself into your bunk with rolled blankets so you would be thrown to the deck. We called it the vomit comet. Half the crew was seasick constantly, including some guys who'd been commercial fishermen before the war. If you could get seasick on SC-648, you could get seasick anywhere. The vessel's shallow draft, only 6 feet 6 inches, meant they responded violently to every wave. In following seas, the round stern lifted out of the water, causing the propellers to race and the entire vessel to shudder. In head seas, the bow punched through waves rather than riding over them, sending spray across the entire deck and flooding the forward compartments. Crew habitability was minimal. 27 men hot bunked in quarters designed for 18. There was a single head and no shower facilities. Fresh water was rationed. Laundry was impossible. After a week at sea, the entire vessel smelled of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and vomit. The PC-class vessels were marginally better. Steel construction allowed for better hull shape and improved stability. The larger size meant more internal volume for crew spaces. There were actual berthing compartments instead of converted storage spaces. The galley could produce hot meals even in rough weather. But marginally better didn't mean comfortable. 65 men lived in spaces designed for 40. Berthing was still hot bunking to men sharing one bunk on rotating watches. Privacy was non-existent. The steel hull transmitted every sound throughout the vessel, so sleep was constantly interrupted by footsteps overhead, machinery noise, and watch changes. Both vessel classes suffered from mechanical reliability problems stemming from the abbreviated construction schedule. Diesel engines installed by small boatyards often lacked proper alignment, causing vibration and premature wear. Electrical systems were minimal and prone to moisture damage in the saltair environment. Pumps failed frequently, requiring constant attention from engineering crews. Emergency repairs at sea were routine. Engine room crews became expert at improvising fixes with whatever materials were available. Wooden wedges, wire wrapping, fabric patches soaked in waterproof compound. The boats kept running not because they were well built, but because their crews refused to let them stop. Despite these harsh conditions, morale remained surprisingly high. The crews developed intense unit cohesion. When you're living in a 110-foot wooden boat that rolls 60 degrees in storms, you either bond with your crewmates or go insane. Most chose bonding. Veterans of the Splinter fleet consistently reported in post-war interviews that the discomfort was worth it because they were actually accomplishing something. Unlike troops stuck in rear area garrison duty or sailors aboard vessels that never saw action, the patrol craft crews were actively hunting the enemy. They were making a difference, however small. The Splinter fleet's operational record extended across every theater of naval warfare. In the Atlantic, SC and PC vessels escorted 63,000 coastal convoys between 1942 and 1945. They conducted 89,000 anti-submarine patrol missions. They rescued 12,400 survivors from torpedoed merchant ships and damaged naval vessels. In the Caribbean, PC vessels protected the vital oil tanker routes from Venezuela to the United States. Between 1942 and 1944, they escorted 14,200 tanker voyages carrying aviation fuel, heating oil, and diesel fuel. German U-boats sank 23 tankers in the Caribbean during this period, a significant number, but far below the 200 tankers German planning had projected. In the Mediterranean, PC vessels participated in convoy escort operations supporting the North African campaign and in the invasions of Sicily and Italy. In the Pacific, SC vessels served primarily as harbor patrol craft and inter-island transports. SC-740 operated in the Philippines, transporting supplies between liberated islands. SC-755 served as harbor patrol at Okinawa, screening the anchorage against Japanese suicide boats and combat swimmers. SC-1031 participated in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, rescuing 43 sailors from the damaged destroyer USS Johnston. The wooden hulls proved more durable in combat than expected. SC-532 survived a kamikaze strike off Okinawa in April 1945. The Japanese aircraft, a Mitsubishi Zero, crashed into the vessel's superstructure and exploded. The impact punched through the wooden deck and detonated the aircraft's remaining ammunition and fuel. By all logic, the explosion should have sunk the vessel. Wooden construction plus aviation fuel fireball should equal catastrophic loss, but the laminated hull absorbed the explosion differently than steel would have. The blast force dispersed across multiple wood layers instead of concentrating at weld seams. The fire spread rapidly across the surface, but didn't penetrate deeply into the structure. Damage control parties extinguished the flames within 20 minutes. SC-532 remained afloat. 15 crew members died in the initial impact and fire. 32 more were wounded, many with severe burns, but the vessel survived. After 3 weeks of repairs at Guam, she returned to service and completed the war on harbor patrol duty. A comparable kamikaze hit on a steel-hulled destroyer escort would likely have sunk the vessel. The concentrated blast force at weld point typically caused catastrophic hull failure. SC-532's survival validated the design philosophy. Wooden construction, while inferior to steel in many respects, offered unexpected advantages in blast resistance. The final vindication came 7 decades after the war ended. In 2001, an oil company survey crew scanning the Gulf of Mexico seafloor for potential drilling sites discovered a large sonar contact in deep water south of the Mississippi River Delta. The object was clearly artificial to geometrically regular to be natural terrain. The survey crew marked the coordinates and moved on. They were looking for oil deposits, not historical artifacts. The coordinates sat in a database for 3 years before someone noticed they matched Herbert Claudius' 1942 after action report almost exactly. Dr. Robert Church, a marine archaeologist specializing in World War II shipwrecks, obtained funding for a detailed survey in 2004. Using side-scan sonar and remotely operated vehicles, his team documented the wreck site over several months. The images were unambiguous: a German-type IXE U-boat, lying in 1,400 meters of water. Hull number U-166 still faintly visible on the conning tower. The submarine's back was broken just aft of the conning tower, consistent with catastrophic internal explosion from a close proximity depth charge detonation. The stern section had collapsed. The pressure hull showed multiple fracture points. Church's analysis, published in 2014 after high-resolution sonar imaging became available, confirmed every detail of Claudius's 1942 report. The submarine lay at exactly the coordinates PC-566 had reported. The damage pattern matched depth charge attack. The orientation and position matched the timeline Claudius had documented. Herbert Claudius had been right all along. In 2014, the U.S. Navy officially credited PC-566 and Lieutenant Herbert Claudius with sinking U-166 on July 30, 1942. The Navy issued a posthumous commendation. The Naval History and Heritage Command updated its official records to reflect the confirmed kill. The vindication came 72 years too late for Claudius, who had died in 1995, still believing the Navy had unjustly denied him credit. But it validated the entire Splinter fleet concept. Small vessels with inexperienced crews could kill submarines that conventional wisdom claimed only fleet destroyers could engage successfully. Adequate weapons, deployed in overwhelming numbers, operated by minimally trained personnel proved sufficient to defeat sophisticated weapons operated by highly trained specialists. The ocean had kept the secret for 7 decades, but the ocean doesn't forget. And eventually, the truth emerged from the deep. The Splinter fleet statistics tell a story of industrial achievement that matched or exceeded better-known mass production programs. SC-497 class production, 438 vessels commissioned between March 1942 and October 1944. Total displacement, 64,824 tons. Total cost, $78.84 million. Average cost per vessel, $180,000. Average construction time, 119 days. -1 to 461 class production, 343 vessels commissioned between April 1942 and September 1945. Total displacement, 154,350 tons. Total cost, $206.4 million. Combined totals, 781 vessels, 219,174 tons, $285.4 million. The entire Splinter fleet cost less than 3 Essex-class aircraft carriers. It cost less than 2 Iowa-class battleships. It represented approximately 4% of total U.S. Navy procurement spending during World War II. For that modest investment, America gained 781 warships that collectively logged more than 22 million nautical miles of patrol operations, escorted more than 77,000 convoys, and forced German submarines to operate at drastically reduced efficiency. The production dispersed across more than 60 boatyards ensured that no single facility's disruption could significantly impact overall output. No air raid, no labor strike, no natural disaster, no equipment shortage at any one yard could cripple the program. When one yard fell behind schedule, others compensated. This distributed production model proved remarkably resilient. During the entire war, only one boatyard completely failed to meet its construction contracts, a small yard in Louisiana that went bankrupt in 1943 due to mismanagement. The Navy simply transferred the incomplete hulls to another yard, and production continued without interruption. Variants within each class reflected operational learning rather than fundamental design flaws. The SC-497 initial design proved adequate, but uncomfortable. Later variants incorporated minor improvements, modified bow shape starting with SC-644, improved ventilation, upgraded electrical systems. But the basic design remained unchanged, evidence that the original concept worked sufficiently well to avoid major redesign. PC-461 variants showed more evolution. PC-461 variant starting with PC-580 incorporated improved sonar equipment. PC-461-3 variant starting with PC-803 added radar. These incremental improvements reflected technology availability rather than design deficiencies. The Lola's rate 5.0% for the entire Splinter fleet compared to 11.2% for destroyers during the same period validated the survivability-focused design philosophy. American warship designers had made a conscious choice to prioritize crew survival over combat capability. That choice paid dividends. When you can build a new ship in 4 months, but need years to train a skilled crew, keeping the crew alive becomes more important than keeping the ship operational. The Splinter fleet embodied that calculation. Survivor testimony provides the human dimension behind the statistics. Lieutenant Commander Eugene McDaniel, who commanded PC-565 when she sank U-521, described the engagement in a 1978 interview. "We were scared to death. None of us had done this before. I was a merchant captain before the war. I'd never dropped a depth charge in my life. My sonar operator had 6 weeks of training. My gun crews had practiced on ranges, but they'd never shot at a real target that was shooting back. When we got that sonar contact, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the microphone. I was thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if the depth charges were set wrong? What if we lost sonar contact? What if the submarine fired a torpedo at us? But you don't have time to be afraid when you're in the middle of an attack run. You just do what you were trained to do. You follow the procedures, you trust your crew. You make the best decisions you can with the information you have." When those depth charges went off and oil came up, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. We'd done it. We'd actually sunk a submarine. Then I felt sick because I realized we'd just killed 49 men. German sailors, sure, but still human beings with families and lives. War is like that. You're terrified and exhilarated and guilty all at the same time. You do terrible things for necessary reasons, and you live with it afterward. Chief Petty Officer Thomas Ryan served as chief engineer aboard SC-627 during the Normandy invasion. His 1989 oral history interview captured the chaos of D-Day. "We were 1,000 yards off Omaha Beach, guiding landing craft through the channels. German artillery was bracketing us with 88mm shells. Every few minutes, a shell would land close enough to spray us with water and shrapnel. Our job was to stay on station and keep guiding boats in. Didn't matter if we were taking fire, didn't matter if we were scared. Those landing craft needed to know where the safe channels were, and we were the ones marking them. I was in the engine room the whole time, so I couldn't see what was happening topside. I could hear it though, the shells exploding. The machine gun fire, our own guns firing back, men shouting. At one point, a shell hit close enough that the whole boat lifted out of the water. I thought we were done, but we came back down and the engines kept running. The wooden hull flexed like crazy, but it didn't break. We stayed on station for 14 hours straight. 14 hours of guiding boats in while getting shot at. By the end of it, we were so exhausted we could barely move, but we'd done our job. Every landing craft we guided through meant troops getting to the beach. That's what mattered. Seaman Second Class James Liu served aboard PC 558 in the Mediterranean. His 2003 memoir described the grinding reality of convoy escort duty. People think naval combat is dramatic battles with explosions and heroics. Most of the time, it's just boring, endless hours of watching empty ocean. False sonar contacts that turn out to be whales or temperature layers. Mechanical breakdowns that require emergency repairs in the middle of the night. You spend 95% of your time maintaining equipment, standing watch, and trying to stay awake. The other 5% is pure terror when something actually happens. I remember this one convoy we escorted from North Africa to Naples in September 1943, 8 days at sea. 7 of those days were completely uneventful. We saw nothing but merchant ships and empty ocean. On day 8, we got a sonar contact. The whole crew went to battle stations. Then it turned out to be a school of fish creating a false sonar return. That's what convoy escort was like. Hours of boredom punctuated by false alarms. The tedium was part of the job. The constant vigilance wore you down, but it was necessary. Most of the time, we didn't do anything. But the submarines knew we were there, and that made them cautious. That caution saved lives. The design philosophy contrast between American and German warships illuminates fundamental strategic differences. German U-boat design prioritized combat capability above all else. Every design choice maximized offensive power or operational endurance. Crew habitability was secondary, survivability was tertiary. A Type 7 U-boat displaced 760 tons surfaced, carried 40 for crew, and mounted 14 torpedoes. Crew quarters were claustrophobic men hot-bunked in spaces barely large enough to accommodate them. Watertight integrity depended on a pressure hull that, once breached, flooded catastrophically. Escape procedures were minimal. The design philosophy assumed that crew capability, superior training, tactical excellence, aggressive command would compensate for survivability limitations. German submariners were extensively trained, sometimes for a year or more before their first combat patrol. They were indoctrinated with offensive spirit and taught to press attacks even under unfavorable conditions. This approach worked brilliantly in 1940 to 1940 to when Allied anti-submarine capabilities were limited and U-boats operated with relative impunity. German submarines achieved extraordinary kill ratios, with individual boats sometimes sinking 100,000 plus tons of merchant shipping. But the approach failed catastrophically when Allied anti-submarine capabilities improved. As depth charge technology advanced, as sonar detection improved, as convoy escort numbers increased, German U-boats began dying in numbers that exceeded replacement capability. Germany couldn't train new crews fast enough to replace casualties. The year-long training pipeline meant that every dead submariner represented not just one casualty, but the loss of a year's training investment. By late 1943, Germany was sending inadequately trained crews to sea because there was no time for proper instruction. Those inadequately trained crews died even faster, creating a death spiral. American patrol craft design made the opposite choice. Combat capability was secondary. Crew survivability was primary. The SC-497 and PC-461 classes deliberately compromised offensive power to maximize crew survival probability. Watertight compartmentalization meant that damage to any single compartment wouldn't sink the vessel. Redundant bilge pumps ensured pumping capacity even after power loss. Life raft capacity exceeded crew complement by 40%. The wooden SC hulls provided unexpected survivability advantages. Shell fragments that would penetrate steel plate and create deadly shrapnel simply punched through laminated wood, creating clean holes that could be emergency patched. Near-miss explosions that would crack weld seams in steel hulls merely compressed wooden planking without creating leaks. This design philosophy assumed that crew capability, having any crew at all, mattered more than individual vessel combat power. American patrol craft crews received minimal training, sometimes only 6 weeks. The approach worked brilliantly in extended warfare. Even minimally trained crews improved with experience. As long as the crew lived, the vessel retained combat value even after sustaining damage that would have sunk a less survivable design. American shipyards could build a new patrol craft in for months. But training an experienced crew required years of actual operations. Building vessels that brought crews home meant those experienced crews could be transferred to new vessels, bringing their hard-won knowledge with them. Germany built sophisticated weapons that killed their highly trained crews. The casualty statistics tell the story. 3% of American patrol craft crew died, while 68% of German U-boat crews died. You can absolutely win when you losing crews at 3% while building replacement vessels faster than the enemy can sink them. The concept of distributed lethality, deploying numerous moderately capable platforms rather than few highly capable platforms, directly descends from Splinter fleet experience. Modern navies recognize that in contested environments, expensive capital ships become lucrative targets. The survivability-focused design philosophy influenced post-war American warship design. Watertight integrity, redundant systems, and crew survivability features became mandatory requirements rather than nice-to-have additions. The distributed production model proved that specialized military shipbuilding doesn't require massive dedicated facilities. This lesson proved crucial during Cold War production surges and remains relevant today as the U.S. Navy considers expanding the fleet without expanding major shipyard capacity. Adequate weapons, deployed in overwhelming numbers, can achieve strategic effects that exceed the capabilities of sophisticated weapons deployed in limited numbers. This lesson applies beyond naval warfare. It's fundamentally about industrial capacity versus technological sophistication. In extended conflicts, the side that can produce adequate weapons faster than the enemy can destroy them will eventually prevail, regardless of individual weapon system superiority. The Sherman tank was inferior to German Panthers and Tigers in virtually every measurable category: thinner armor, weaker gun, less powerful engine. But America built 49,230 for Shermans compared to Germany's 6,000 Panthers and 1,347 Tigers. Quantity overwhelmed quality. The P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang were excellent aircraft, but not dramatically superior to German FW-190s or Bf-109s. Germany built 20,000 FW-190s and 34,000 Bf-109s. Impressive numbers, but insufficient to match combined Allied production from American, British, and Soviet factories. The B-2 for Liberator was arguably inferior to the B-17 Flying Fortress in crew preference and operational record. But America built 18,480 to B-24s because they could be manufactured more quickly and cheaply than B-17s. Quantity mattered more than the quality differential. The Splinter fleet embodied this principle at sea. Those 20 for patrol craft, distributed across 8 times as many patrol sectors, achieved greater strategic impact than 3 destroyers concentrated in fleet operations. Dr. Robert Church's 2014 confirmation of PC-566's kill closed a circle that had remained open for 72 years. Herbert Claudius died in 1995 at age 87, still insisting he'd killed U-166, still bitter about the Navy's dismissal of his claim. His family had fought for decades to get the Navy to re-examine the evidence, but bureaucratic inertia and lost records made reconsideration nearly impossible. U-166 lay exactly where Claudius said it would be, damaged exactly as depth charge attack would produce, positioned exactly as his after-action report described. The Navy's formal recognition in 2014 included a posthumous commendation and official credit for the kill. But the recognition meant more than one man's vindication. It validated an entire category of warship that history had largely forgotten. The Splinter fleet, the Donald Duck Navy, the wooden boat crews, the amateur sailors had done exactly what the Navy asked them to do. They'd survived in wooden boats that weren't supposed to work, crewed by men who weren't supposed to be capable of naval combat, and they'd won. America built patrol craft faster than Germany could sink them. The escorts multiplied until U-boats couldn't operate effectively. The submarines spent more time evading than attacking, merchant ship losses declined. But they conducted nearly 40% of anti-submarine patrol missions and escorted more than 60% of coastal convoys. That's the lesson Robert Church's discovery reinforced. Strategic impact comes from persistent presence, not individual capability. The ocean kept Herbert Claudius's vindication waiting for 72 years. But eventually, the truth surfaced: the wooden boats worked, and PC-566 killed U-166 exactly where Lieutenant Herbert Claudius said she did, exactly the way he said it happened. America won the Battle of the Atlantic not with superior technology or brilliant commanders or revolutionary tactics. For every U-boat Germany launched, America commissioned for patrol craft. The Splinter fleet, those wooden boats, those steel patrol craft, those minimally trained crews embodied the industrial might that won World War II, the forgotten vessels, the overlooked crews. The boats that weren't supposed to matter,